Okay, we can see Councillor Schwarzenberg now. So I will call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of Oliver for Monday, February 8th, 2021 to order and ask the CAO if we have any late items.
I do not believe we have any late items for this meeting.
Thank you. And can I get a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. Anyone opposed? Motion carried. Adoption of prior minutes. Can I get a motion for the adoption of the January 21st, 2021 Committee of the Whole meeting minutes?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? And anyone opposed? The motion is carried. Moving on to item E, water matters, E1 Black Sage pipe damage. And I will turn it over to the Director of Operations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know I had touched on the Black Sage damage a little bit in a previous meeting, but so this is to inform and update council what we found and what's happening right now with some of the Black Sage pipe. Staff believe that on June 15th, 2020, during a repair to the line, a valve was accidentally turned off, which caused pressure buildup and resulting in a water hammer causing damage to 30-inch ductile iron, which is quite large pipe compared to some of the other pipe that we use. And this was at Black Sage Pump House in System 2. This damage wasn't evident until late November. The pump houses get winterized after the irrigation season, and no one's out there as much or as frequently. And then it was noticed in late November that there was a large lake next door in the next door neighbor's orchard. From excavations in mid-December, it was just discovered that the ductile iron pipe had deflected and was no longer usable in its current state. And the first two pictures in the report that was given to council show the deflection, and you could see the lines where they're not lining up properly anymore, or at the same same distance between the top and the bottom. Since that initial calls, town staff have been working with we contacted an insurance company, and since December we've been working with them to see if the town was covered and or what would be covered or covered at all. And it's taken a couple months for that to come out. And recently it was determined that the town would be covered by insurance for the repair of the pipe back to the original state. However, any improvements would be at the cost of the town. The insurance company has also hired a quantity surveyor to keep checks and balances in place between the contractor, our engineer, their engineer, and the insurance company. The pipe has now been removed, and I added some pictures again, and though the last two pictures where they've excavated out the pipe manifold system and are prepared to, they've started again today to start piecing everything back together. So the contractor right now is Grizzly Excavating Limited, and we've hired them at an hourly rate, an equipment hourly rate, and it's overseen by our True Engineering, and the insurance provider's engineer will be overseeing it as well, and the quantity surveyor will be going through the numbers. So everybody seems okay with it. We've had a couple meetings now. I think we're on track to fix it. We didn't want to bring it to council until we knew more. We believe that the damage was done in June, where this event happened, but no one at the time realized if anything happened or something happened at all. So and so staff, when we went back and started looking at it and got our engineers involved, we we came back to a date in June where we think that that's when the valves were turned, certain valves were turned off and the pumps were running and they were kicking on and off. And out at Black Sage Domestic, it runs on pressure, so it runs on demand out there. And if the alarming system doesn't automatically kick on when there's spikes or drops in pressure, because it happens all the time. As soon as people turn off water and turn it back on for crops, it'll affect the system. So there's usually a delay in alarming. Otherwise, we'd have somebody out there full time. So it's all the damage was happening within this alarm set period, and no one knew about it. We have discussed this with staff. We were looking to implement a few things, and we were wrapping our heads around things to see if if we can, an event like this wouldn't happen again. And I've listed some improvements, and we're going to look at the control and alarms. Maybe there is something that we could do in the future. The guys mentioned the cross training of staff, updating our town's mapping system, which we're always doing, but to include the critical valves that shouldn't be turned off. We also already ordered valve markers. So when you pull a lid off a valve box, there'll be a marker in it. You can even lock them if you need to. And we're hoping to order some tablets so the guys have the most current mapping information with them when they're out in certain vehicles or out in the rural area or any area around town. So the damage is estimated to cost about $400,000. It's because it's so labor intensive. Pulling this big ductile iron pipe apart, removing all the material on the pipe. We have nowhere to store it on site. It has to be shipped out, brought back in. We had to order new gaskets and parts. Our engineers did mention to staff and to the insurance adjuster that maybe there's additional anchors that could be built and across these three pipes that wind up and down to give chlorine contact time to the first customers. That's why it was built. It's oversized pipe, so it has more time for the chlorine to do its thing before it hits our first customers. So the additional costs and modifications may be around $55,000 plus our deductible. So it'd bring it to about $60,000 we may have to find in the water budget. I have some ideas, but we probably want to wait until the general budgets are discussed again and see what if there are changes to the water and sewer budgets because of that. So that's basically it in a nutshell. And if anybody has any questions, I can try to answer them.
Thank you, Director. Mayor and Council, any questions? Councilor Michelle?
I don't know if, can people hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, I had some concern when I read the report initially. I mean, I've kind of understand what we're doing now, but it's too bad we didn't have some of these checks in place before, because it seems like somebody didn't know they were supposed to shut off a valve and then forgot to turn it back on or something. So hopefully, we're going to have our staff completely trained on that, because if insurance hadn't have decided to cover this would be a hell of a hit for the town. I think that I'm in agreement that we should do the extra anchors and spend that money out of the water fund. Just one question on that approximately 55. How much is that is deductible? What was our deductible on the insurance?
It's $5,000, and the estimated improvements are around 55. We're not sure yet because we're playing with timelines. It's not a project that we could sit there and prep for and get ready for it and put it out the tender. It's something that we're kind of dealing on the fly to make sure it's all completed before the irrigation season. So all these are estimated numbers at this point right now.
Yeah, and you mentioned in your report, it doesn't say that here in the steps you're taking, but that all these critical valves are going to be mapped, and the operators out there will have access to that and make sure that if they're turning something off that can cause this kind of damage, that we don't have it happening somewhere else.
That's correct. We do have some of them. We already had some out in the field for years, and it's just we needed to order more of them. And then we had a meeting with our service crew and operators and said, there's more of these out there that could possibly cause damage or create some critical something to happen. So the guys have started noting those and putting them in, and then we got to put it into our mapping system now.
Okay. Yeah. Horse is out of the barn. We just got to fix it now.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
Any other questions, Mayor and Council? Questions or comments? Hearing none, we have a proposed motion that the Director of Operations Black Sage Pipe Damage Report dated February 3rd, 2021 be received for information. Can I get a mover?
So moved.
And a seconder?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, is anyone opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you. Moving on to business arising out of prior minutes, item F1, cold weather shelter feedback and location query follow-up. And I will turn it over to the CAO.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The purpose of the report that is in front of you this afternoon is to provide a summary of the feedback received as part of the public information meeting pertaining to the proposed 3-year temporary use permit to operate a cold weather shelter and the responses received from organizations and property owners for housing a cold weather shelter. There's some information in here with regards to the responses on the online questionnaire. Saw 64 respondents, with 31 of those in opposition to the proposed temporary use permit at 511 Church Avenue. Multiple comments received from the same IP addresses were combined into one comment. Limited policing, the emergency response time, high amount of theft in the area, too close to schools and residents, and property values were among the main concerns. The majority of the comments from the 31 non-supporters felt that safety is the biggest concern. Although the respondents opposed to the TUP 24, the 34 are in favor of a cold weather shelter located elsewhere in town. Suggestions for another location were varied. Repeat suggestions were the Air Cadet Hangar, Old Library on Station Street, Portuguese Club, Doctor's Office on Main, that's 5980 Main, and empty retail space downtown. Additionally, late feedback form submissions, 4 supported, 3 supported with comments, and 3 did not support. The majority are worried about drug use, and a comment repeated in online questionnaire in regards to 555 Earl Crescent now being cleaned up and the neighborhood finally has peace of mind. The information meeting held on December 3rd, comments resoundingly were concerned about safety, drug use, theft, decreasing property values, and proposed locations being too close to residential properties. Staff have reached out to the Oliver Elks Club, Oliver Legion, property owners of, just a second. I got some stuff going on here. 6239 Station Street and 6018 Main Street to determine if they would be interested in housing the cold weather shelter. 3 replies were received. Oliver's Elk Club has advised that presently they are unable to commit to providing the necessary space. However, they would be willing to revisit this at a later date should additional information around security and funding be provided. The Oliver Legion indicated they cannot commit for a number of reasons, however, the main one being that they are providing their space for ESS should there an emergency arise. The property owner at 6239 Station Street is open to discussion on this matter. The second floor has approximately 2,500 square feet of open space. The property owner is looking to see if a hostel could be used in that space for the rest of the year. The property is within the town center zone in which a hotel hostel is a permitted use. The biggest hurdle around this proposed use would be the various building code upgrades required. And we were not able to receive a response back from the property owner of 6018. We did try multiple times to touch base with them. With respect to the 6239 Station Street, I have been in conversation with the individual, and I was actually talking to the property owner today, and the property owner has decided that he would prefer not to provide space for the cold shelter. So he has withdrawn his property as one that could be used. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, CAO. Mayor and Council, any questions or comments? I'm looking. Oh, Councillor Schwarzenberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair to the CAO, I know a couple of people have expressed some thoughts about the Multicultural Center. Has that been looked at all?
Through the chair, we did look at it at the very beginning, but it is being used to house some programs for Parks and Recreation.
Any further questions? I did have a couple myself, however, they were all basically revolved around the Station Street property, so that changes things if that's been removed out of the picture. Councillor Ventimiglia.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have a couple of questions. So if I was, the addresses and stuff confuse me without a map in front of me. So if I understand from what was just reported from the CAO, the Station Street address that we're talking about is the old library. That's the one that's been taken off the table today?
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay. Well, that's unfortunate because that I think actually is a location worth conversing about. But the questions that I had were related to the use of a trailer, which was brought up in the comments by a few people. You know, like a movable facility that could be located in multiple places in town. Is that something that we could do as a part of the of this program, or is that something that's not open for consideration?
Through the chair, with respect to that, we would the facility would have to be bigger than just a trailer. There would have to be a number of trailers to house everything, and it would be a cost that the community would have to absorb for the infrastructure itself. That's not part of the funding that's available through BC Housing.
Okay. That makes sense. So if that's the direction we were to consider going, that's something that we would have to pay for ourselves as a community, would be our asset. So I guess thinking about this since getting the report on the weekend and then today, I think I'm a bit frustrated, I guess is the word, because it's ironic and a bit sad that we're having this conversation at the beginning of the coldest week of the whole entire season. And we're expecting temperatures of -20 and below, and have been told, and not that it's visible to the naked eye, but have been told that there's people sleeping outside in our community and we can't figure out how to address that. So I guess my question is, when we put this on our priority list as a council, however many years ago, we were discussing an extreme cold weather shelter, or, you know, a cold weather shelter of sorts that's open for certain periods when the temperature dips below a certain degree, which transformed into what we're talking about now due to funding. Is the conversation around an extreme cold weather shelter, kind of where we started, a conversation that we could have, and how would we have that? So is there any funding available from anywhere, from any source for that sort of a thing? And if not, is that something that, like the trailer situation, we just have to absorb as a community?
Thank you. Through the chair, there is no funding available through BC Housing with respect to a cold snap. They've taken that away, as was reported earlier. EMBC does not provide funding towards this because it's not classified as an emergency. And so the funding cannot be provided through there. It would have to be something that the community as a whole would have to get together, so like your churches and those organizations that have to get together as a community to provide it. And I definitely don't know of any funding that's available at this point in time through the provincial government. I could ask our corporate officer if she is aware of any, because she is also our emergency management coordinator.
Councillor Ventimiglia, any more follow-up?
No, I guess it is frustrating because the funding that's available is so specific, and doesn't allow for flexibility for each community to do what best suits the needs of the community, that it's just very restrictive. And so it's unfortunate that this is where we're at. But I would personally like to see us keep working towards finding a solution.
It is, and sorry, councillors, I see that you have your hands up. I'll just be 1 second here because it's sort of along the lines of that. I was sending some emails around yesterday to Parks and Rec and to Desert Sun Counseling Center to see if there was something we could do in the meantime, just because we are in a cold weather emergency here if you're living outside. And Desert Sun unfortunately doesn't have the capacity at the moment to take that on as an emergency. So it's not only finding funding in a space, but also somebody to facilitate that. And, unfortunately, with that not being the direction that we've gone, I don't know, I mean, unless, like the CAO said, that, a church wants to step in or something like that, perhaps they could. But yeah, it seems like we're stuck in between a bit of a rock and a hard place right now. Councillor Schwarzenberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I ask my question, I'll just note that in Penticton, I know that a couple of the shelters have received emergency funding to put in extra beds during the cold weather. I think, though, I'm not sure about this, and maybe the corporate officers knows better than I, but I think you already have to have a funded shelter that is operating, and then when an emergency cold weather event comes, there's extra funds that can be drawn on to kick in for extra beds during that extreme cold time. My question is through to the CAO. I understand, going back to the Multicultural Center, I understand that Parks and Rec is currently using it for programming. But my question is, would that building be suitable for what we're looking at? And then, as COVID hopefully dissipates, as we get vaccines and more people are allowed into the community center and things that where Parks and Rec uses for their programs, is that Multicultural Center building viable for a cold weather shelter from November to March? Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, it could be viable, but there's, I think, some additional discussion that has to go around that for the location of it. When I did talk to Parks and Rec, they did point out that other facilities there are in use during that time as well. There was just, but that's a discussion that has to be had by yourselves and I guess the society.
Any further follow-up, Councillor Schwarzenberger? You good?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Councillor Mattis?
Thank you. Just a couple of points. The one feedback was from the owner of a trailer rental place. It wasn't that the town would have to purchase them, and I'm not sure why renting them, if it were Desert Sun, would be any different than renting the facility that they're hoping to rent. So I'm not sure why we couldn't do a little more investigation there. Further to Councillor Schwarzenberger, I think the Multicultural Center would prove itself to be far too small to accommodate what they want to accommodate. I know that we all want this, and it hits us more as we are in the coldest time of the year. It has been a priority of ours. It's certainly not one that we have put a tremendous amount of focus on. It's something we've always wanted, but when we entered this fall, it was also never expected it would happen this year. It was all looking towards next year, given the changes from the provincial government on the funding and that sort of thing. So I'm if there is, not that there will be any more time, but we should look into that trailer rental option as well. They talked about placing them on the airport over by the Air Cadet hangar, as opposed to us buying trailers. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Mattis. Councillor Ventimiglia? Or is that a hand up from before?
Forgot to take my hand down. Thank you.
Mayor Johansson?
Thanks, Chair. Just through to the CAO, I'm just wondering if the committee that was formed after the open house, if they've been meeting and if they've got any, have been working on any angles moving forward or any thoughts coming from that committee. And I'm thinking they'll probably play a pretty key role moving forward, trying to determine the location and find out how to operate it and how to make it secure and those kind of things.
Through the chair, currently the committee is not scheduled to meet until I do believe the 19th of this month. And there has been some conversation by one of the committee members, provided some information with regards to some companies that have done this in the past. And I do believe that Desert Sun is going to contact them to have a conversation with them for best practices, et cetera, and possibly best locations and just get some experience, some information from their experience.
Mayor Johansson, any follow-up?
No, I think that's it at this point in time. I'm just glad to see that they're still planning to meet and keep evaluating options moving forward. Thank you.
I have a question for the CAO. Are we at any risk of losing our location at the church if this is further delayed?
Not that I'm aware of. The application is still sitting there. It's a decision that council has to make whether they want to postpone consideration of it or if they want to go forward.
So that being the case, I'm certainly in favor of this going forward. I feel like we've done an exhaustive search. However, I don't think this is going to happen this year. So I'm happy to wait until after the committee has reconvened prior to making a decision. I don't know what the rest of council thinks about that.
I don't think a decision is required here. I think we're just for discussion.
Through the chair, the TUP is on the regular council meeting.
Future food for thought. Mayor Johansson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just thinking about the TUP and the church. I mean, it is an ideal building. Location isn't working out so well, but one of the things I was kind of disappointed in is that after the initial meeting we had at the Venables Theater, and then there was the open house after that, I was kind of hoping that there would be a much better plan laid out how that facility was going to be managed. And I was hopeful that that information may go a long way to helping the neighborhood feel a lot more comfortable with that location. I don't think that happened. I think the presentation that was given during the open house was very much the presentation that was given at the Venables Theater when we met at our regular meeting there. So I think moving forward, it's a challenge whether the neighborhood will ever embrace that site, but I think it may have a chance if there was a much more better operational plan put forward and explained. It may have a chance at that point in time. It's hard to say, but without more information on how the facility is going to be managed and operated, I think there's just too many questions. Thank you.
Mayor Johansson, any further questions or comments? And can I get a motion for receipt?
So moved.
Thank you. And a seconder, please.
Second.
Any further discussion? Anyone opposed? And the motion carries. Moving on to business, item G1, zoning bylaw 1380, proposed housekeeping amendments. And I will turn it over to the Director of Development Services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll share my screen here. All right, so today I'll be discussing proposed housekeeping amendments to zoning bylaw 1380. And as you'll see, there's a nice photo of me right there with the housekeeping equipment. The purpose of this report is to present various proposed housekeeping amendments to zoning bylaw 1380 for feedback to the committee of the whole prior to preparation of the bylaw for first and second reading by council. Let's get into the proposed amendments right away. So the first one being bulk petroleum sales and storage. The purpose would be to add this as a definition. A recent inquiry from a potential property owner to construct this type of business revealed that it's not a permitted use within the industrial area. The closest definition is a service station, which is defined as land or a building used for the retail sale of motor vehicle fuels and lubricants. Also, Amendment 21 is adding bulk petroleum sales and storage as a permitted use within the M1 general industrial zone. And lastly, associated with the petroleum use is removing section 6.3.5 in its entirety, which states that the bulk storage of propane, flammable liquid, and other hazardous material is prohibited in all zones. The reason for removing this section is that several businesses in town would not comply to this section, such as the Card Lock on Maple Avenue, which has multiple above ground gas tanks, the car wash, which has an above ground propane tank, and so on. This prohibition is also preventing the bulk propane business from opening up, as I previously mentioned. These businesses are inspected through Technical Safety BC during the permitting process, and the new safe premises bylaw addresses any hazardous conditions that aren't properly regulated or permitted. Right now, I'll talk about recreational vehicles. Amendment 2, adding a provision to the campground definition that allows snowbirds to stay for a period of up to 4 months during the low season. During the high season, a stay is capped at 1 month. RVs have become permanent residences in campgrounds, which has been noticed by staff. To enforce or not to enforce? RVs do not conform to the building code and cannot be regulated to ensure adequate separation between them in the event of a fire. They do not contribute to taxes, additional taxes, or pay additional sewer charges. So this is an item, it's actually, I'll get into that here, but
Director, we have a couple of questions. I wonder before moving on.
okay, sure. Yeah, no, I can.
No?
Yeah, if the idea is to ask questions at each section, that's possible, or I could present the whole thing and then we could have questions. It's up to you, Madam Chair.
Do you want to jump in now, Councillor Mattis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to suggest that we, given the limited time that we have, that we cover these off. They are in point form, so point 1, point 2, rather than jumping all over, and cover each one, because each one of them will have its own discussion before we move on to the next one.
Sure, that's fair. Then I'll go back. Is that Councillor Schwarzenberger? Is that your similar comment?
Yes, I wanted to do them one at a time if possible.
Sure, that's fair. Yeah. Okay, so I'll go back to bulk petroleum sales and storage. Does council have any comments on those? The proposed amendments, first to add it as a definition, add it as a permitted use in the
one at a time, please, Randy. Like, we'll do number 1 and then we'll get to 21 when we get to 21.
Okay. Sure, then section 1.
Any questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Director.
Okay, section 21, which would be adding it as a permitted use within the industrial zone only.
I see no hands.
And then how about section 5, which is removing section 6.3.5, which basically states a long list of hazardous conditions that are not permitted in every zone.
Councillor Mattis?
Thank you. I would suggest just removing the liquefied petroleum and leaving the rest of it exactly as it is. Because if you remove it all, then you're allowing all those other things to occur, which we don't want to occur. It's only the liquefied petroleum that we need to concern ourselves with.
Any further comments on that point? Then back to you, Director.
Thank you. All right, section 2, adding a provision to the campground definition that allows snowbirds to stay for a period of up to 4 months. Maybe we can talk first about if council has any questions on that topic and adding the 4 months during the winter months.
Councillor Mattis?
I think we can write whatever we want, but the issue to me is going to be enforceability. I think we almost need a legal opinion as to what's enforceable and what is not enforceable. At this point, we've allowed it to carry on without any enforcement. So we've pretty much set a precedent for the last 10 or 15 or 20 years. It would be hard to go to those people now and say, you have to move out of those campgrounds. This is probably an hour-long discussion in itself as to how best to handle this, but I think a legal opinion would be a wise thing to start with.
Councillor Ventimiglia?
Thank you, Chair. I didn't think it was going to be that long of a discussion. In my mind, they're not permanent residents, not paying taxes, and shouldn't be in the same place living as a household year after year. So my only comment was going to be that 4 months seems a bit short for the winter season that most snowbirds spend here, and I was going to suggest 6.
I think I was more referring to the second paragraph where a bigger discussion.
Councillor Schwarzenberger?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm fine with the 4 months, but I agree with Councillor Mattis that we have let this go for a long time. And maybe there is, I think a legal opinion would be a good idea, but maybe there is a way to ask for additional taxes if someone is to stay year-round or stay for an extended period of time, including for park models. Once there's a park model on a campground lot, that to me becomes a permanent site, and we can argue back and forth about whether we should allow those, but there are a bunch of them within campgrounds around Tuckalnuit Lake already. So maybe they can be grandfathered in, but just charged regular town taxes. But I think we need an opinion on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Schwarzenberger. My comment on this was just going to be to ask if we can get some information from neighboring municipalities, what they're doing if they're taxing recreational vehicles that are staying long-term. Councillor Ventimiglia?
Sorry, it's that darn hand I keep forgetting to take down. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments on this point? Then back to you, Director. Oh, sorry, Councillor Mattis.
Sorry, a small thing. I see one of my other notes here. One of the things you need to add in as well in conjunction with this is a definition of fire camp.
Thank you, Councillor Mattis. Any other questions or comments? And back to you, Mr. Houle.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I could definitely look into getting a legal opinion. I just wanted to add though, if the town's never permitted it, then I don't see any issues with enforcing it. Unless it was permitted in the zoning bylaw back in 1990 or 2000 when this started occurring, then I could definitely, if that's a direction from council to get a legal opinion, I could do that. I don't see, because you've let something go for so long, I don't see an issue with trying to enforce it now, but they may, the lawyer also might have some good advice as to how to approach enforcing it. So it might be helpful to get that feedback, because it will be a challenging one, that's for sure. Thank you. All right, this is also related to recreational vehicles. So the proposed amendment would be to replace section 6.3.1 of prohibited uses of lands, buildings, and structures by stating that any use located within a tent, trailer, motorhome, or RV is prohibited, except for temporary use associated with a permitted campground or forest fire camp. The existing wording prohibiting an RV as a permanent residence has caused enforcement challenges, as one could argue that staying for 3 months in the summer is not permanent. Although the amendments will not allow any uses within an RV, including a weekend visit by friends or family, bylaw staff can use discretion in these situations. The other topic would be allowing an RV during construction, which is a practice that has been previously permitted by the town, not through the zoning bylaw, but on a case-by-case basis. There's been previous complaints, only a handful, about these types of situations, mostly due to the length of construction time. So as a permit goes on, 2 years with extensions, 3 years, the people are still living there. And then also it could have a negative impact to established campgrounds. So there are campgrounds in this community that could use the business. And if you're allowing RVs throughout the town, is that having a negative impact? Anyways, some more input from council on this one would be helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Mattis?
I think a couple of things. Again, this goes back to the legal opinion. I'm a little concerned when we talk about discretion and picking and choosing when we enforce, that sort of thing. This is exactly why we end up in these types of situations. This thing to me needs a rework, because people have family and friends come in trailers and stay in their yard for a week at a time. And to say discretion, if one neighbor has a loud party, for example, bylaw goes up and says you have to get rid of your family. They have to move out, but your neighbor's family can stay because they're quiet. I have some concerns with those types of things when it comes to discretion. Also, in terms of banning any use for recreational vehicles, no real issues. I just thought we should be a little more clear about what any use means. Are we referring to any commercial use? So maybe the word commercial could be used in there. Something along those lines. I'm not exactly sure, but I understand where the director's trying to go with this, and it's a very difficult situation. But I think we need clarity in this. As opposed to discretion.
Thank you, Councillor Mattis. Councillor Schwarzenberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I understand the point about, not allowing somebody to camp for a week that could be using one of our campgrounds. I think it's more specific to, obviously, the single family zoning area, and I think it should maybe be zoning specific, because you don't want a bunch of, as Councillor Mattis said, you don't want a bunch of campers in somebody's front yard or sitting on the front street with a extension cord across the sidewalk to keep it powered, as has happened. And again, there's intermittent regulations on that, or calling people on it. So I would like to see what other towns and cities in our end of the valley do with respect to this one subject of recreational vehicles on a really short term, like weekends or or a week, say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Schwarzenberger. Mayor Johansson.
Thank you, Chair. I just said I would do agree with Councillor Mattis. I said he said using the words discretion. I think we need any type of bylaw that we come up with definitely needs to be more black and white. It'd be good to get some feedback from some other communities, but we definitely, I think we need to include in here addressing where people are living in these RVs permanently, and there's a few of them I've seen. It's quite obvious that they're being used on a permanent basis. And the other one that would be a concern is people renting them out as B&Bs, those types of things, or vacation rentals. And of course, Bylaw would be able to determine that through any investigation they were doing. So a little more detail and feedback from other municipalities, but something that's definitely clear, giving Bylaw, taking the discretion out of it, makes it a lot easier. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Johansson. Councillor Ventimilla.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with most of the comments made, and my question is just, have we had many complaints about recreational vehicles being used for Airbnbs or for family at the end of the driveway for prolonged periods of time, those sorts of things?
Thank you, Councillor Ventimilla. Yes, definitely. There's been lots of complaints, and this has been a challenging situation for us to deal with. This past year, there hasn't been any Airbnbs within recreational vehicles, but the year before there was. So this is definitely a housekeeping amendment. I just wanted to add that this section of the bylaw that I'm adding here, this actually came from Penticton. It's from the city of Penticton, this wording. And there aren't many municipalities around here that would allow this type of use. I would like to get some direction from council then. You know, if you say a weekend a year or 3 weekends a year is permitted, then how do you enforce that? That's the only thing. So from my end, it would be preferred either it's permitted or it's not. So I would just hope to get a bit more direction from council as to what I should bring back.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Mattis.
I'm not sure what the answer is. It's a very difficult question. If I don't own a motorhome, but if I own a motorhome and I'm having a family gathering and my house is full and I put someone in the motorhome for the weekend, I mean, I don't know what the answer is here, but these are the types of situations that we have here in the Okanagan. Like we live in a resort type area, which involves camping and people coming here for holidays. And somehow we have to accommodate friends and family as well as, rather than saying, no, you got to stay in the motel or you have to stay in you got to go to the campground. You can't stay at my place, you know?
Thank you, Councillor Mattis. I know, and I've been in a similar situation. I mean, basically ever since I moved to the Okanagan, I've had family come to visit. And at the time that we had a fifth wheel, we used to call it the guest suite. And that's where people would stay because we have a 2-bedroom house and 4 people in it. So it's a tough one for sure. That doesn't help Director Houle very much. Do you have enough to move on to the next point from this one, or do you need something more definitive from us for now?
If perhaps council had some more thoughts about the RVs during construction, because that hasn't come up yet, and I would appreciate a bit more feedback on that.
This may require a seminar all by itself.
Yeah.
That was a tough one for me as well, I think, Director. I felt like, you know, if I was going to renovate my house and I had an RV, that would be the most cost-effective way for me to do it. And you know, I would hate for, you know, someone to not be able to improve this situation, whereas maybe they could have if that was an option for them. So it's, I mean, I can see where, you know, people could push the limits on that and maybe there could be time limits built around it or something like that. But it's, yeah, that's a tough one. I wouldn't want to stand in people's way of being able to improve their situation if that was the way that they would be able to do it. Councillor Schwarzenberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I agree. I think, you know, if there's going to be a renovation, like a kitchen renovation or something like that, I think that might make sense. But we, just because you have a building permit that's been extended, you shouldn't be You shouldn't be allowed to sit in your motorhome on the lot for 4 years as you're slowly building your house by yourself. And we know we've had issues with that in the past in town. So I think we should put a time limit on it of, 4 to 6 months, something in that range where it can't go any further than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Schwarzenberger. Councillor Ventimilla.
Thank you, Chair. I'm totally in favor of allowing use of recreational vehicle during construction, but as well having a time limit. I think I visit new homes all the time where people have constructed their home while living in their RV in the driveway. And we also run into situations every now and then where somebody has a rental accommodation during building, but building goes on longer than planned and they need somewhere to be for the remaining couple of months. But exactly as mentioned, I think by Councillor Schwarzenberger, you wouldn't want to have a 4-year building process with somebody living 4 years in the driveway. I think putting some sort of a time limit also encourages timely building, because I don't think we want to see a 4-year build just in general. So, if we put some sort of a time limit on how long you can live in your RV, that might help speed up the process. So yes, in favor of usage, but also in favor of a timeline, somewhere between 6 and 12 months, perhaps.
Councillor Ventimilla. Councillor Mattis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for the rest of council to know that to build your own home nowadays is next to impossible because of new home certification that is required and the training that's required. For someone to take on building their own home nowadays, virtually impossible. So you're going to be hiring a contractor. If you're hiring a contractor for new construction, there's no need to be camped in your driveway. You can go and stay in the campground, because you won't actually be working on the house. They pretty much don't allow that according to the building code and new home warranty. If you're doing a renovation, that's a different story. And there are timeframes involved with each one, but they're certainly a whole lot different in each case as well. I think if we're going to look at this, that for this type of things, we need to put in fees and permits in place. That if you're going to do this, you get a permit for a period of time, and when the permit expires, it could be possibly renewed, but again, it's another fee to do that. And if you're going to do this, you should be paying a fee while you're doing it as well, if council chooses to allow it to happen, period.
Thank you, Councillor Mattis. Major Hansen.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Mattis stole the words right out of my mouth. I was thinking exactly some kind of a permit process, something that could be addressed during the application for a building permit, and maybe some fee to live in your trailer on the property, an associated timeline with that being disclosed at the time the permit's given. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. Any further comments on this point? All right, back to you, Director.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I definitely do appreciate the fee comment, because there are situations where they want to hook up to water and want to hook up to sewer. So we're dealing with that as well. So no, I definitely think the permitting process is an appropriate option. Okay, moving along. Mobile vending units. So number 3 would be adding a definition for mobile vending unit. This amendment will add a definition for food trucks or mobile retail shops, which has not previously been identified in the zoning bylaw. Any comments on that?
I see no comments, Director.
Right, and then adding to section 6.3.6 to state that mobile vending units shall be permitted on all town-owned lands, provided that town regulations and permissions are followed, and commercially zoned private properties. It's been previous practice for the town to permit mobile vending units on town property, such as the Parks and Recreation property, as well as permitting mobile vending units on commercial lots with the permission of the property owner. This amendment would formalize that use. Any comments there?
Councillor Mattis.
Is this currently taking place without any permitting in place? Like, are we charging for this, or is it just something they make an application and we say, yeah, go ahead, and there's no cost involved?
They're required to get a business license, but that's the only cost.
Okay. I would also then, if that's the case, I would put forward that we should be looking at, again, permitting Because in essence, we talked about people not paying taxes in campgrounds. In essence, they would have a building or not a business license, same as every other business in town, but they would be contributing nothing to our tax base. I think we should be putting permits in place for these as well if we're going to allow them, so that we again are collecting taxes, and it puts them on the same footing as every other business in town.
Thank you, Councillor Mattis. Councillor Schwarzenberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I agree. There should be some permitting or some sort of application base, and that would allow us to have a limit on food trucks, because it hasn't seemed to be a problem in the past. But if you get too many food trucks, they have an effect on the restaurants in town who pay taxes and employ local people and that type of thing. So I think permitting would be a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Schwarzenberger. Councillor Ventimiglia.
Thank you, Chair. I don't disagree with the permitting idea, but if that's the road we're going to go down, I would be interested in knowing what our neighboring communities do, just to make sure that we're putting ourselves on sort of a level playing field.
Thank you, Councillor Ventimiglia. Councillor Mattis.
For me, the permitting would only apply on our properties, as the commercial properties giving permission are paying taxes.
Any further questions or comments? And back to Director Houle.
Thank you. Antennas. Amendment 7, exempting antenna designed and used to receive radio and television signals and their supporting structures from height restrictions, provided that Industry Canada guidelines are followed. It's been discovered during the recent enforcement of a radio antenna in a residential neighborhood that the town does not have the authority to regulate antennas that are less than 15 meters in height, as this falls under the jurisdiction of Industry Canada. No building permit is required either. Furthermore, television antennas are not common anymore due to the elimination of over-the-air television in recent years. Thank you.
Council, any questions or comments? Mayor Johansson.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to kind of say on this one. I know the antenna that had a complaint there, and that probably meets the definition of a tower more than it does an antenna. And I'm just wondering if we allow antennas to be put in place that size without permitting to be associated with it, to make sure that it does meet all the industry standards. You'd hate to have somebody sort of jury rig something up and have it blow over, because when you get a device that high, it does get affected by the wind quite a bit. And then there is also the issue of affecting the quality of somebody else's view if you're just allowed to put an antenna up anywhere you feel like putting an antenna up with no regulations around that. I don't have an answer for it, but I know, and it doesn't happen very much, but it could be contentious. It can be contentious when structures of this size are installed in town.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Mattis.
Very quickly, would a cell tower be considered an antenna according to the regulations, the federal regulations, and you put one up wherever you want?
Well, my understanding is those would not be, because they broadcast. So new antenna systems where the height is less than 15 meters above ground level are exempt. So even their supporting structures would be exempt. But cell towers would require public consultation, which then would require the land use authority.
Councillor Mattis.
That tower that we're talking about down on Meadows there, whatever it is it also broadcasts. It's not just a receiving antenna.
Okay, well, we'll look into that more, but I guess the point was that we have very limited ability to regulate these types of structures. And we tried, and I reached out to Spectrum, who looks after the management of them through Industry Canada, and they said there's nothing you can do. The town cannot require them to get a building permit. anything like that. So I just wanted to pass that along, and I suggest that we change that in our bylaw because currently it says that we can regulate it. So it's
Any further comments on this point? Mayor Johansson?
Thank you, Chair. Just would request that maybe we look into what other municipalities do with these towers that go up in some areas. I don't see them too often as well, but I'm just wondering if they're basically treating them as an unregulated structure, or they have some regulations around the installation of those structures. I think personally, I wouldn't mind seeing us have some regulations around them and making sure that they are structurally sound, like a structural engineer signing off on it. Again, you have a tower that's in the 35, 40 foot range in height. If it's not installed correctly, it definitely could provide a safety hazard for the neighbors that are living next to them, and also just again quality of view property. For example, if you can install a device of this size, it would be good to maybe ask for some feedback from the neighbors that are going to be impacted by this. I definitely wouldn't mind us having some more regulations around it. It'd be interesting again to see what other communities are doing with them. It's not something that happens all the time, but again, the complaints that you had to deal with just the one kind of indicates it would be good to have some regulations around it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. Any further comments? And Director Houle.
all right. Thank you. Moving along, Amendment 8 would be removing the 90 meters squared or 40% total floor area maximum for secondary suites. This requirement was in the building code and was changed in 2019, I believe. It allows the secondary suite to be of any size. And also they made some more amendments to the building code, which makes it easier and less onerous for property owners to legalize their existing secondary suites, which we have found through the permitting of vacation rentals, that we've been able to get them the business license and also legalize their suite with very little work for the property owner. So that's good news. It'll also add some clarity around the fact that a secondary suite may not be stratified from the main dwelling. And this regulation was taken from a neighboring municipality. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Mayor and Council, any questions or comments? Councilor Mattis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple small things. Should we not maintain that it has to be less than 50% of the building, just so that the house is the primary use as opposed to the secondary suite being the primary use? I'm just throwing that question out. Second thing that came to me, and I got to bring it up now or later when we get to carriage houses, but it occurred to me that the way our bylaw is written, that it is possible to have a secondary suite and a carriage house. There's nothing that prevents both of them from occurring. So I think we should put some language in there that you could only have one or the other, but not both on the property, so that we don't end up with 3 dwellings on one property, basically.
Just to add or to answer that question, Councillor Mattis, there is provisions in each individual residential zone that talks about the maximum allowed. It says either a carriage house or a secondary suite. It's not in the actual secondary suites guidelines, but we can put that in there. You could say that a secondary suite is not permitted in conjunction with the carriage house. But yeah, if you go to say the RS1 zone, then it'll touch on the permitted number of dwellings, and it'll say it there. But oh, sorry, one more thing too. No, I definitely.
You're right, it does.
Yeah, so I definitely think the under 50% is a good idea. I just wanted to reiterate the fact that that's not in the building code anymore, but to say that it's less than 50% is then the principal dwelling is probably a good idea.
Okay.
Any further questions or comments, Council? Councilor Ventimilla.
Thank you, Chair. I totally agree with the percentage versus square meters comment, and just wanted to say that I think this is great because the easier we can make it for people to legalize the suites, the better off we'll be.
Thank you, Councilor Ventimilla. Any further questions or comments? And back to Director Houle.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to add to Councillor Ventimille's comment, that there are situations where the floor area of the upstairs is almost exactly the same as the downstairs, and they're trying to find ways to legalize it. So I think that these changes will be helpful for sure. All right, moving on to carriage homes. Amending the guidelines to place a maximum of 90 square meters floor area, including the attached floor area of the accessory building. Increasing the height from 6 to 6.5 to accommodate a full second floor. And in the case of a conversion of an accessory building, allowing the setbacks to be the existing setbacks. This amendment will make it easier for residents to convert underutilized accessory buildings into dwelling units. Building code will address any issues, no development variance permit required. What I mean by that is if there's an existing say single story garage sitting at the back of a property, 1.5 meters from the property line, well, the current guidelines would make the person get a variance to allow that. What these guidelines would say is it's the building code that interprets that. That building's been there for however long. So the impact of it now being a residence, it could be limited, but instead of making the people go through a variance process and then to find out that, that building has to be non-combustible construction and so on because of the proximity to the property line, you're basically eliminating that step, the step of having to get a variance permit. And then talking about a recent example of the bottom floor of a two-story building being converted from a rec room to living space for the upstairs carriage home. The building is now close to 180 square meters in floor area. It's difficult to enforce once built. This could have been avoided if the guidelines are amended to include the attached accessory building floor area as part of this calculation. In the past 5 years, there's been approximately 5 carriage houses built, with 3 being 1 story in the 500 to 700 square feet, and the other 2 being 2 story, 1,500 to 1,800 square feet, which were above a garage. So I will be seeking comments from council on the proposed amendments with floor area, height increases, and the existing setback provision.
Councillor Mattis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The height is fine, floor area is probably fine. This one example that you gave us, it sounds as though there was a basement in that particular situation that is causing a problem. Is that correct, Director?
No, it's there's the main floor and then the upstairs. I mean, I can mention it. It's the property on Park Drive. That's the large carriage house on Park Drive. It'll be coming before council for a variance now in probably the next meeting or the one after that. But this is just an example of, someone proposes a 968 square foot garage on the bottom floor and then 968 above. And instead of that, I'm saying that staff are saying that perhaps that total should include the garage. The 968 should include the garage floor.
And to my mind, I'm not sure that it's necessary to take this route to solve this particular problem. Because if I read it correctly, it sounds like we have more of an enforcement issue once again, where we have a bylaw. The bylaw is very clear, and someone has now gone around the bylaw, and then after the fact is going to come to council and ask for a variance. They're going to do it and then get forgiveness after the fact. And this goes back to, again, getting a legal opinion about what we can do in this type. How can we enforce this where we can say, no, those bedrooms must be removed and it must be turned back into a rec room or garage or whatever it is designated. It cannot be part of the carriage house. This goes back to the legal opinion again. It's like we're trying to solve the problem rather than enforce the existing rules. Change the rules to fit the problem rather than enforce the rules. I'm concerned with that. It also, when I look at the numbers and the sizes, it's probably fine. Maybe it's just, we passed a variance not that long ago, and and I'm in a personal situation where I have a garage where I want to put a carriage house into it, as an example. The garage already exceeds the size requirements that you're referring to. The garage all by itself is over and above what the whole thing is. So that, what do you do in that situation?
Yeah, no, that's a difficult one. Likely because the garage there was a variance approved for the garage, right?
Right.
Now you're reducing the garage. Yeah. Yeah, that would be one that would be challenging for sure to think about.
Okay, and we just passed a variance on an oversized garage here last week or the last meeting.
Yep.
So more and more people are wanting larger garages than, than what you're referring to. I'm not sure that this is the solution to this. If we have a problem, then let's look at that particular problem and how did we get to that problem and see if we can't resolve that issue first before we start changing the rules to accommodate the problem. Again, this probably falls into that campground discussion where we could spend an hour on how do we fix this particular one, but we won't go quite that far today.
Thank you, Councillor Mattis. Councillor Ventimilla.
Thank you, Chair. I am just trying to understand what is being proposed. So the maximum of 90 square meters floor area, including attached accessory buildings, does that mean that the 90 square meters maximum is for both the garage and carriage house above, if that's the scenario we're describing?
That's what I'm proposing it be changed to. Right now, it's not. Right now, it doesn't count the attached garage.
Yeah, I think, I just think that's really small. So then you're limiting basically, if I'm understanding correctly, and I kind of don't think I am, but then you're limiting a garage square footage or area to 45 square meters, which is approximately, I think, 400 square feet or something like that. And then the top floor, which would be used as a carriage house, to the same amount. That's just seems like a very small space when we're trying to encourage infill and densification, and we lack of rentals and all of these sorts of things. 400-ish square feet is a pretty small area to be allowed for usage as a carriage house, in my opinion. So I agree with Councillor Mattis. If this has come about as a specific, one specific case, which I didn't realize that when reading through this before, but there's got to be a different way to solve that because it just seems small.
Thank you, Councillor Ventimilla. Councillor Schwarzenberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with my other two colleagues that we should, the wording should be that the footprint should be 90 square meters. So it takes up to a maximum of 900 square meters of land value or land area, but that only one level can be a living area so in the picture that's on the screen right now, if you had a garage on the bottom and a living area on the top, and they're both 90 square meters, then that would be fine. What wouldn't be fine is a building like that where they put bedrooms or another unit on the bottom. So a garage with a carriage house on top that is 900 square, the carriage house is 900 square meters, that's fine. But if you have the bottom as 900 square meters and the top as 900 square meters, that wouldn't be fine. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Councillor Schwarzenberger. And I would basically echo what's been said as well. I think we want to encourage the building of carriage houses, and a 450 square foot home is pretty small, especially if we're looking at trying to house families. So I would agree with either just considering the square footage of the carriage house itself or the footprint. Any other questions, or Councillor Ventimilla?
Just a comment, thank you, Chair. I guess to Councillor Mattis's point, if this has come about as a result of building in the community, that it seems like it's an enforcement issue, and I think that I'm pretty tired, and I'm sure most of us are pretty tired of, and you see it, I think, more in the rural area than in town, but of people saying they're building one thing and then building something totally different and trying to get away with it or plead ignorance at the end. And it's it's not fair to those that are trying to do it right. And we just need to figure out how to enforce those issues as we go along.
Thank you, Councillor Ventimiglia. Any further comments or questions? Okay, Director Gould.
Thank you, Councillor Grice. I did want to point out a couple things here. So to Councillor Schwarzenberger's point, there is a provision, 6.9.4 does limit the total footprint already. So there is a provision that limits the total footprint of carriage homes, garages, collectively cannot occupy in excess of 90 square meters. So there is that provision in there. And I did want to also add that this provision would limit the carriage houses on the second floor in the case of where it's 2 floors. So I'll just go to this next screen just to show you what exactly I was getting at. So, you know, a 90 square meter one level home would be permitted. A side-by-side 480 square feet with an accessory building would be permitted. What wouldn't be permitted was what we talked about, the 90 square meters on top of an accessory building, 90 square meters beside a large garage. You could have 45 square meters on a main level in a basement, or a 2-story 45 square meters. So just to throw that out there, but I think I understand what council's feelings are about this, so that's helpful. Thank you.
Any other comments, council? Thank you. Go ahead, Director Gould.
Thank you. Parking spaces amendments. So Amendment 12, residential parking amendments. This would simplify the parking requirements for apartment buildings and townhouses and reduce the parking requirements for dwelling units within commercial buildings to 1 per unit. Commercial properties are within a central location in the town, which allows for more active transportation and hopefully less reliance on a vehicle. Furthermore, lowering the parking requirements in these commercial areas could increase the number of units built, which is important in time with reduced units for sale or rent. Hotel parking requirements. Staff are recommending that the parking requirements be increased from 1 parking space per 3 hotel rooms to 1 parking space per 1 hotel room to get closer to the actual demand for parking for a hotel. So these parking requirements don't take into staff parking into consideration as well. So it is important from staff perspective that it should be 1 per 1 room. And then the loading space requirements. The current loading space requirements do not make it clear if a space is required if there's less than 20 dwelling units, or if there's less than 1 per 1,500 gross floor area, or 1 per 3,000 gross floor area for commercial or industrial buildings. This amendment provides some clarity around that a loading space is not required unless there's over 20 dwelling units, such as an apartment, which it makes sense if there's lots of people moving in. It's good to have a loading space for that. And then if there's a commercial building or an industrial building over 1,000 square meters, then a loading space would be required. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Mattes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to the Director. There was a comment in your report regarding parking and the rounding up and the rounding down, and that we should round to the nearest whole number, which I have no issue with. But if you do that, then that's where your loading zone. See, the loading zone was covered before by the rounding. If you had less than 20 units, it would round up to requiring, you know, because if you had 0.2 of that number, let's say, it would round up. I'm not sure that I want to have a 10,000 square foot, which is 1,000 square meters, industrial building without a loading zone. I think we need to work on what we're trying to do in that area. But to me, in commercial and industrial areas, we need to have loading zones, and they need to be properly sited and situated, and proper length for full vehicles. So I would ask that you take another look at that part of the bylaw, is the loading zone area for commercial and industrial for sure.
Thank you, Councillor Mattes. Any other questions or comments? Thank you. And go ahead, Director.
Thank you. Sorry, we're getting there. Vacation rentals. Permitting vacation rentals as an accessory use within the block of RM1 site-specific zone properties located along Kootenay Street in between Veterans and Hillcrest Avenue. Although these properties are currently zoned for higher density, The properties are all currently used as single-family dwellings. A request has been received from a property owner in this area to operate a vacation rental, which is not a permitted use in the zone. Given the likelihood that these properties will remain as single-family for the foreseeable future, and given that home occupations and secondary suites are permitted in this zone, staff do not feel that the request is unreasonable and recommend that a housekeeping amendment be completed to allow vacation rentals in this entire block of RM1S zones. So it would not allow it in all RM1 zones, but just this particular site-specific block. Property owners will be notified of this change ahead of the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Matters.
Thanks. I seem to be jumping in on all these. I forgot to mention something on the last one regarding the parking. And I know it may be, something that's needed, but I was a little concerned with the one parking space per room when I look at the hotel that we had built, and in terms of further hotels, if we wish to attract any, I think we need to show some flexibility. Not if we did it one on, I don't think I've ever seen that parking lot full yet, except maybe on opening day when all the dignitaries and guests were there. Be that as it may, I would throw out at 2, or if we have double what we have now, 1 for every 2 rooms, and instead of 1 for every 3 type of a thing. But all that aside, I'll just throw that out. Going back to the one that we're on here and on number 16. Director Houle may not be aware, but he's kind of changing when he's gone to point 1 and point 2, that the point II is not actually II, it's lowercase Roman numerals is what it is. II. And we should remain consistent. It's a minor detail, but rather than using the numbers 1 and 2, it should be I and II, lowercase Roman numerals, consistent with the rest of the bylaw.
Sorry, Councillor Mattis,
in your report,
Yep.
number 16, replacing section 11.1.1B2. That's actually 2. It's not II, it's 2. With the following and then you go down and you've got point 1, and then second week. That should actually be Roman numerals.
Okay. I thought the CAO would have caught that one, so.
It's a minor thing, but. And I know you've referred to it as II before, but it's actually Roman numerals.
Oh, okay. Well, that would make it easier to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Matters. CAO?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll catch it when it comes by on bylaw. But I did also want to comment with regards to parking at our current hotel. They actually put in more spots than what were required of them for that particular development.
Maybe there's a happy medium.
Thank you, CAO. Councillor Ventimiglia?
Thank you, Chair. Seeing as we have gone away from vacation rentals and back to parking for a moment, then I might as well comment. I fully support the recommendation to require 1 parking stall per unit, because that allows us to at least have a conversation if we're in a position at some point in time to be dealing with another hotel coming to our community. It puts us in a position to at least, this is the starting point, and this is where our conversation begins. I think that, of course, we could work ourselves down to 1 per 2 units or whatever it is, but that we should then, given that, I don't want to call it an upper hand, but upper hand, start requiring funds in lieu of parking stalls, because we may not be there now and we may not be there in 10 or 20 years, but maybe in 50 years, we're in a position where we have, we're looking at building a parking facility and we're going to need funds to do that. So I support it the way that it's written.
Good point.
Thank you, Councillor Ventimiglia. Councillor Schwarzenberger?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Councillor Ventimiglia took away all my thunder there. I was going to say the same thing, and I believe the current hotel, there was 125 parking spots, 25 which they deeded to the town that we own, and there was close to 100 parking spots for their 80 rooms. So I think we should, as Councillor Ventimiglia said, stick with the 1 per room, and then be somewhat flexible if we have to be in attracting new hotels. Thank you.
Councillor Schwarzenberger. Any comment on the vacation rentals on Kootenai Street? Councillor Ventimilla.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to ask because my memory is not allowing me to bring anything up, but have we dealt with any vacation rentals as temporary use permits within the community?
No, we didn't go that route. I know the regional district, so that's probably where you're getting the reference.
Yeah.
The regional district does that process where they require an application for every single vacation rental. It's a bit onerous. The town took an approach where we permitted it within certain zones, and yeah, so no, we don't go that route.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And I wasn't sure if I was confused with RDOS town or what it was. I'm not against making this zone a vacation rental zone at all. I think that we just need to be careful about how many vacation rentals we start to allow, because what we're doing is taking away from our longer term rental stock as we allow these single family homes to convert to vacation rentals, and to no fault of the homeowners. Of why wouldn't you want to do that? Of course, it's way more profitable than yearly rental. But I would be interested in having the conversation around then temporary use permits for vacation rentals in the rest of town.
Thank you, Councillor Ventimilla. Councillor Mattis.
Just a clarification. I think our vacation rentals are structured that the owner has to be there. So I'm not sure that it takes away from the rental pool in that regard.
Thank you, Councillor Mattis. Excuse me, Councillor Ventimilla.
Yeah, no, thank you for that point, Councillor Mattis. I forgot about that actually.
My only comment, and maybe it's covered in the vacation rental bylaw, but just to make sure there's a provision that it, because of the zoning of this area, that it does have to be a single family dwelling to allow for there to be a vacation rental. I'm not sure if that's.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's something I thought about right away, is you don't want to just add vacation rentals as a permitted use, because someone might go and build a townhouse there in the future and then put in vacation rentals, right? So I would add wording that says vacation rentals is permitted as an accessory use, provided it's within a single family dwelling.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Back to you, Director.
All right, commercial dwelling restrictions, section 17, 18, 19, 20, removing the one dwelling unit restriction on C2 and C3 properties, and reiterating that dwelling units must be located within the same building of the permitted commercial use. The OCP policies for commercial highway encourages multifamily residential above ground floor commercial uses. This cannot be achieved with a maximum of one dwelling unit restriction. Lifting the restriction can help to encourage the development of our Main Street while providing more living space for future tenants. This can also have a positive effect on our businesses. The maximum density, which is floor area ratio, of 1 remains as part of the C2 zone and 3 for the C3 zone. These limit the total floor area. This restriction is an appropriate way of limiting density in absence of a restriction on the total number of units allowed. So what that means is, in the C2 zone, if the maximum floor area ratio is 1, then if the property is 10,000 square feet in size, then you can build 10,000 square feet of floor area. So that's the restriction. Instead of restricting the number of units, you restrict the total floor area, which is very common. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Director. Any questions or comments? Looks like Councillor Mattis is reaching for his hand. Yes, go ahead.
I am. My only concern again, it goes back to maybe a percentage or something like that. What is the primary use? If I put a building in this type of zoning and I have a 500 square foot store in the front, does that allow me to do 9,500 square feet of residential in the back and on top? I just wanted some clarification about primary use again, as opposed to secondary use.
No, that's a very good point, and it's something that can be looked at if that's a concern of council. We could limit the maximum floor area of residential as being less than 50%, but yeah, I mean, currently the provisions wouldn't. Yeah, I'd have to think about that a little bit more maybe before I bring the bylaw amendment forward. Thank you for bringing that up.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Director.
Just writing down that last point. I can watch the video later, maybe. The other amendments, amending the term land area to parcel coverage. That was that section I was speaking about earlier when Councilor Schwarzenberger brought it up. It currently uses the term land area, but it should use the term parcel coverage. So it's clarifying that. Amendment 11 would be rounding parking requirements to the nearest whole number. So what that means is if there's a duplex that would require, actually my example was going to be for an apartment where there's visitor parking requirements and there's only 0.2 per dwelling unit. Say if you built 2 units, then that's 0.4, and then it would be rounded down, so there wouldn't be a visitor parking requirement. Amendment 13 and 14 are ensuring garages and carports have a 6-meter setback from the street in the RS4 zones. This is applicable in the RS1 and 2 zones, and it's also adding it now to the RS4. Reducing front parcel line setback for an accessory structure in the RS4 zone from 5 to 4.5 for consistency with the other zones. Amendment 22 and 23, reducing the interior setbacks for industrial buildings from 3 to 1.5 to keep with recent development trends and past variance approvals by council. And then Amendment 24, adding a site-specific provision to the visitor center to allow a cafe operation as a permitted accessory use if so desired. This is an item that the visitor center has brought up previously. I don't know if there's immediate plans to put the cafe in, but their lease agreement was amended to possibly allow this type of use. So this would be formalizing it. Any comments?
Thank you, Director. Councilor Matters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My only comment was on the very last one, adding, instead of doing it as a site specific, could we do it as an accessory use for our parks? They are our parks, so we do maintain some control if we were to lease a space for this sort of a thing, but rather than just doing it as a one-off, then it could possibly come before council as someone wanting to lease an area in a park to put in a food stand or whatever the case may be in any one of our parks, as opposed to just a site specific in that area.
Councilor Grice, if I may, I would be happy to hear from the rest of council on this, just so that I know what to bring forward, because it is quite different to allow a cafe in a one-off or in all Parks and Rec zones.
Well, I'm thinking, would we want a small ice cream stand next to the water park, as an example? You know, again, that would become site specific as opposed to an allowable accessory, and then someone would have to come before council to say, hey, I want to lease this property from you and this is what I want to do. And then council would say at that point, yes or no.
Councilor Ventimilla.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to understand what we're talking about. Currently, food trucks don't fall under what we're talking about, if I understand right. So Parks and Rec could grant an ice cream truck or whatever it happens to be, a spot at Kinsman or at the Ball Diamonds or wherever it is on a seasonal contract or something like that, without us having to make any sort of changes to our current bylaws?
Well, there's an
That's a
argument. There's an argument to be made that currently mobile vending units aren't permitted. So the town has sort of allowed it in the past, but that's why I was recommending to clean that up. But just to add to Councillor Mattis's point, I wanted to say that this amendment would be to allow an eating and drinking establishment, so a restaurant, and then a cafe falls under a restaurant. So just to make that clear to all of council, that if we allowed it, then a restaurant could be permitted in any Parks and Rec zone.
Yeah, so thank you for that clarification, because that's kind of what I was understanding. I think they're two different things. We want to encourage, I think personally, I think we want to encourage, food trucks and vendors and that sort of thing in our parks to liven them up a bit and to draw traffic down to those areas. But I think that's quite different than a built restaurant or a built coffee shop. And I wouldn't want to see them meshed into one.
Again, it's our land. They have to come to us for a lease. So that's when we would make the choice.
CAO.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to that and with Parks and Recreation, they do have the contract in place to manage our parks. They did come to us at one point and ask if it would be okay to have that vehicle there at the park in Lions Park, due to the fact they wanted to try to get more activity going in there because of all the vandalism, et cetera, that was going on in the area. The different extracurricular activities that were going on, I guess you might want to say, besides just being in the park. So they had come and asked, and council at the time had indicated that they were more than, they thought that it would be appropriate to have a food truck in those areas.
Thank you, CAO. Any other comments on that matter? If that's, or do you need more, Director Houle?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, I don't see any hands, and please carry on.
All right, I think that's it. So thank you for the fun workshop. The options are that the committee of the whole refer the bylaw amendments as presented, or they refer it with any identified changes, which I feel that I've written all those down, or they refer it back to staff. The staff recommendation was to prepare the bylaw amendments as presented, and then bring it forward to the February 22nd meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Houle. So we have a recommended motion. Do I have a mover? Councilor Mattis.
Would we see the recommendations in any other form other than the bylaw, or do we require another workshop to wordsmith and make sure that we're getting what we want before it goes to the final bylaw?
I feel that I can capture, 99% of the changes and bring forth a bylaw amendment to first and second reading, for first and second reading from council. And if council feels that there should be changes from that point, then we can do that.
Thank you, Director. CAO.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to suggest that perhaps, given the depth of conversation we've had today with regards to this, that we do possibly bring it back to the committee of the whole with the proposed changes. And if you're looking at it at the committee of the whole in the format of a bylaw, you can have that opportunity to move it forward to the regular meeting for readings.
Thank you, CAO. I think perhaps that captured what Councilor Mattis was suggesting. That certainly makes sense to me.
So we would need to change the motion from regular open council to committee of the whole.
Do I have someone to move that motion then? With the changes to being brought forward to the next committee of the whole?
We may want to, I'll just stop sharing here and then Diane can bring it up.
Yeah. Hey, you look just like the guy in the picture.
It's dry, it could be dry, so I'm just trying to spice it up a bit. Diane, are you awake?
There we go.
Oh, awesome, Diane. Great notes.
Okay, so we do have a proposed motion on the table that the committee of the whole direct staff to prepare the proposed bylaw amendments as presented in the Director of Development Services report dated February 8th, 2021, and that the bylaw be brought forward to the February 22nd, 2021 committee of the whole meeting for consideration of first and second reading. And can I have a mover?
I'll move that.
Oh,
Second.
oh.
Moved and seconded, and CAO.
Thank you. You could possibly read your bylaw there, but council did make like they did say that all bylaws had to be read at the regular meeting. So I would say for consideration, or it should be to review the bylaw for the changes that have been discussed during this meeting. And then for consideration.
Has this changed since I read it? Because it says consideration of first and second reading at the regular meeting.
But it's
For consideration and review.
prior to first and second reading, prior to going forward to first and second reading is,
I just think there's going to be a lot of discussion around campgrounds.
Yeah, there we go.
Are the mover and seconder okay with the changes?
I am.
I think Councillor Ventimilla seconded.
Yes, sorry, too many buttons to get back to unmute. Yes.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Is anyone opposed? And the motion carries. Moving on to public question period. I see we have no attendees in the audience, so I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So move.
And a second, please.
Second.
Any discussion? Anyone opposed? And we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
See you in 20 minutes.
Thank you.
See you in 20.